Good, thank you.
I see Eliza here with a great big smile. Slowly coming in. Hillary, you're ready for the discussion?
Yep, I am. I think I am. Yeah.
Wonderful. There will be nothing naughty, no naughty questions, so don't worry, it will be great.
I've never seen the questions. So
Exactly.
it's all fine.
So we have a few people that have joined so far. We'll give it a few more minutes and then start.
Cool.
Good luck, everyone. You've got this.
Thank you. Hi, Belen.
Thank
Good to see
Hi,
you.
Hannah. Hi, Adam. I'll be here. I'll check the questions we got from the Q&A. So I'll keep everyone posted. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Belen.
you.
Thank you.
In the interest of time, we'll get right into it. Hi, everyone. Hi, team. Hi, Hannah. Hi, Adam. Hello to our panelists, as well as everybody that's joining us on our Zoom live, as well as on our different social media platforms. Thank you, everybody, for making time to join this particular webinar. We will be launching our scope brief on the state of data among SMEs in Zambia. Super excited to hear what the insights are, what insights were uncovered after the discussions that we and research that took place prior to having this brief in place. So I'm looking forward to the insights that will be shared by the team from Data for Change. My name is Mulema Kusema, and I'm the Entrepreneurship Associate here at BongoHive. And over the last couple of months, BongoHive and Data for Change have collaboratively worked on, first of all, working on the scope brief, as well as bringing this webinar to life, where we'll get to unpack some of the insights regarding data, as well as have actionable steps to help SMEs leverage data and make data-driven decisions. So I will hand over to Hannah from Data for Change to just give some opening remarks, even before we delve right into it. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Mulemwa. Well, Africa is taking over. According to the UN, by the end of this year, Africans will represent 20% of the world's population. And the UN also projects that African population will hit 40% by the end of this century, driven by high fertility rates and increasing life expectancy. According to Zambia's last census in 2022, the median age is 17 years, a young, growing country. After having lived in Zambia for almost 4 years, in other words, what lacks in energy supply in terms of electricity is met by a youthful population full of energy. Yet, global power shifts are redefining Africa's economic future right now, including Zambia's. Foreign aid is shrinking and the era of donor-driven decision-making is coming to an end. Micro, small, and medium enterprises are the backbone of African economies. That also applies for Zambia, as we will see in the presentation coming up. Yet, they remain systematically excluded from financial markets and struggle to navigate in this rapidly evolving business and geopolitical landscape. Without data, they cannot measure risk, secure financing, take smart decisions for their business based on evidence, nor adapt to climate shocks. This scoping brief that we're launching today is my first publication as Hannah Mwanza, carrying my new Zambian last name through marrying into a Tonga family. So marriage is also a way to increase African population. I am the Executive Director of Data for Change, an equally young foundation born out of the Partnership in Statistics for Development in the 21st Century, short PARIS21, hosted by the OECD, which holds the mandate to strengthen national statistical systems in low and middle income countries, to track the flows and impact, and there has been plenty of impact, of official development assistance, coined development aid, and also to track the Sustainable Development Goals. Because how do we know what works and what doesn't, and how far we are in achieving our goals if we do not track ourselves properly, comparably, and beyond truthfully? So I am truly humbled and honored to kick off this great launch today. Let me tell you that I have marked this day in a year from now, so the 26th March 2026, in my calendar already, to see where we will have taken this initiative in a year from now. And let us take it far. Thank you, BongoHive. Thank you to my great colleagues, Adam and Belen. Thank you, Mulemwa. Welcome, everyone, and back to you.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. A few housekeeping rules. Thank you so much, Hannah. A few housekeeping rules even before we start. Feel free to use the chat for any questions or comments that you might have, even as the presentation goes on. And we'll have a Q&A segment towards the end, so you'll be able to unmute your mic and ask any questions that you have. Adam, please, next slide. So some of the things to expect in our webinar today are the report presentation, of course, and then we would like to make this session as interactive as possible and also get to hear from everyone on the call. So we'll have a validation segment where a few questions will be posed and your insights will be much appreciated, and your participation in that particular activity. So be on the lookout for the link for that particular segment. And then we'll also delve into a panel discussion where our different experts will then get to share their thoughts on our area of discussion. And then we'll open the floor to a Q&A segment, so you'll be allowed to ask both the panelists as well as the Data for Change team some of the questions that might arise even as the presentation goes on. And then we'll end off with some next steps on what to expect after this brief is launched. So at this point, I will hand over to Adam from Data for Change, who will run us through the next segment of our webinar. Over to you, Adam.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Hannah Mulemwa, for your great introduction. I'm just going to spend the next 20 or so minutes running through the key insights that we found in our paper here on Zambia's entrepreneurs, MSMEs, give you guys a little bit of context as to why we are looking at the Zambian data ecosystem, and again, how that fits into the overall general geopolitical trends that we're seeing at the moment. So without further ado, just a bit about me, just to put a face to the name. My name's Adam. I've been working with Hannah at Data for Change for the last year or so. I previously worked at the OECD, and I also currently work at the World Bank as well. I did my master's degree in development economics from the Barcelona School of Economics. And I spent a lot of my time researching statistical ecosystems in low and middle income countries and how we can bolster data for development to achieve the sustainable development goals and to achieve healthier data ecosystems for sustainable development. So that's a bit about me. And yeah, I think let's just dive in to the overall scene. So I think a good place to start off here is setting the global scene. Many people at the moment would probably characterize the overall geopolitical scene as somewhat tumultuous. The last sort of 5 or so years, we've seen, the rise of COVID, lockdown, we've seen the Russia-Ukraine war, increasing prices all over the world. And overall, these risks seem that they're not diminishing, right? So if we look at the World Economic Forum Global Risk Survey that was surveyed with global leaders and business leaders, what we find here is that the first sort of top 4 risks that are perceived risks over the next 2 or so years are, misinformation, disinformation, extreme weather events, state-based armed conflict, and societal polarization. So, over the next sort of couple or so years, these risks are perceived as technological, societal, geopolitical, and environmental, right? Ranked in no particular order. However, what I think is interesting here is that if we look at the next 10 years, i.e., what is this seeming global risks perceived over a 10-year period, all of these risks shift to, or rather the top 4 risks shift to being environmental, right? And that's pretty interesting. So I think this is really sort of applicable in this sort of context whereby African MSMEs seemingly have to adapt to these environmental and geopolitical shifts, but rather over the next 10 years, this is where the key critical inflection point will be in terms of being able to adapt and mitigate these risks over the coming years. So I think that sort of sets the global scene of where we're coming from sort of big picture perspective. And so we set ourselves the mission to understand or uncover a few more insights as to the data collection side of things. How do we tackle these geopolitical risks? How do we tackle these environmental and socioeconomic risks? Well, ultimately with data. So, that's what we wanted to do. We set ourselves this challenge to answer these questions. Firstly, what data do Zambian MSMEs collect? What are the MSME data collection and usage challenges? Seemingly, why is digitalization so important in context of growing business sustainably? We kind of touched upon it on the previous slide. The changing environmental and economic landscape. And again, why does this lack of data lead to lower access to finance? So we'll keep these questions in the back of your head. We'll try, I will hopefully cover all of them. If not, put any questions in the comments and we will try to get to them later. But these are the sort of problem statement questions that we asked ourselves and that hopefully we will cover today. So I think, we set a bit of context in the global scene. Let's dive in a bit more locally and look at the MSME landscape in Zambia. So, if you look to the right here, to the left here rather, we'll see some key facts about the MSME landscape. So firstly, 70% of GDP is contributed by MSMEs in Zambia. 88% of jobs is contributed to MSMEs in Zambia. But I think the most staggering statistic here is that 97% of all businesses are MSMEs, right? And that is quite staggering. So all of these, so MSMEs representing 97% of the economy make up about 70% of GDP, which is a huge, huge amount. If we turn our heads to the right here, we'll see sort of key challenges for MSMEs in Zambia. It's got this number here, 3.6 billion is the financing gap for Zambian MSMEs. So what do we mean by financing gap? We mean, the difference between the amount of capital needed to fund projects versus take away from the amount of available funding. So, this huge figure needed for businesses to scale, to grow, to buy capital, labor, train labor. It's a huge figure that is needed to be plugged. Secondly, 29.4%. It's the share of Zambian MSMEs in the formal sector that have been denied loans due to missing financial records. We'll touch upon this again a bit later in the presentation as to how sort of a lack of data impedes MSMEs from fully participating and gaining loans from the formal sector. And again, lastly, this 3% figure here is Africa's total contribution to global carbon dioxide emissions since the Industrial Revolution, right? But ultimately, Africa as a continent will ultimately bear the burden of a lot of the effects of climate change. So this sort of asymmetric effect here sort of leads Africa as a continent to prepare the most, but unfortunately they are the least polluters. So this sort of sets the scene here for the why MSMEs are so important in Zambia. And now let's dive in a bit deeper into the data landscape and get some key facts just to sort of set the scene a bit more. So again, this is taken from the Bank of Zambia MSME Finance Survey Report in 2022. So these are sort of recent figures. And again, let's just go through them quickly just to sort of gain a bit of an understanding of the Zambian MSME landscape. So first of all, 98.8% of Zambian businesses are classified as micro enterprises with annual turnovers under $3,000 and up to 10 employees. So again, we saw this figure before, comprising most of the sort of businesses within the Zambian landscape. 95.6% of MSMEs operate in the informal sector. 88.6% of MSMEs that did keep records in the informal sector did so using ledgers or books. And we'll come to this again later in the presentation of what that means for borrowing. And again, 74.3% of informal MSMEs did not maintain financial record data. So some interesting statistics here. I think the overall story somewhat suggests that most Zambian MSMEs are informal. And when most don't collect data, and when they do, it's sort of usually in sort of ledgers or books or handwritten. And so ultimately this can lead to inaccuracies. And again, we'll touch upon this later, and we'll see the sort of spillover or second order effects of that. But again, this sort of just highlights the overall data landscape, giving some key facts here. So we wanted to look into this a bit deeper, and we wanted to dive in deeper on these statistics and gain some inference ourselves. So how did we do this? Well, essentially we ran a pre-event survey amongst MSMEs in Zambia, amongst 51 respondents, where we asked individuals about questions on their demographics, on their income levels, on what sort of data tools they use. Kind of surface level questions, pre-event survey, and then we invited some of these participants to take our data challenge questionnaire at a workshop. You can see here on the right, here's a picture at the BongoHive offices. This was in September for a roundtable to explore specific challenges and data opportunities for harnessing specific data. So these are the sort of two qualitative/quantitative insights that you will see over the next few slides. So the sort of two on the left, two pillars on the left is what we use for our scoping paper. And then again, we will sort of validate these insights with the expert panel discussion to come afterwards. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to present the sort of key findings that we found from our scoping brief, from these two insights, the events that we held and the pre-event survey, and hopefully it should paint an overall picture as to the data challenges, use and challenges. So key finding number one, data plays a key role in business development, but MSMEs struggle to digitize key data. So again, we asked our participants, many of our participants use data for business decision making. They see the value in using data for decision making. But again, we sort of asked our participants, this question of, is your data, or rather, is your business data easily accessible in digital format? And the average response was solely around 5.5, 5.5 out of 10, which is, you can see all these responses clustered in the middle here. It's not that high, is it really? But you may be asking yourself, so what? So what if my business data is not easily accessible in digital format? Well, I think, we can tell ourselves this story whereby if this data is not available in sort of in digitized format, it's unable to be tracked over time. And so ultimately, if you're an MSME going to the bank for a loan, or rather trying to prove your creditworthiness, your lack of data results in a lack of risk accuracy from the bank. And so you're more likely to be denied a loan from a bank. And this ultimately increases this financing gap that we're talking, this 3.6 billion figure that we were talking about in the beginning. So, this kind of feeds into this cyclical, essentially systemic issue of a lack of data just prevents overall growth, and this struggle to digitize key data sort of hinders MSMEs to grow sustainably. And again, we found that, smaller MSMEs with a sort of lower turnover, lower revenue are less likely to have dedicated data resources due to financial constraints. And that's largely unsurprising, right? If you're just starting off in your business journey, again, you're unlikely to have these tools to be able to digitize data properly. So that's the first interesting insight that we found. Secondly, key finding number 2, climate change is a priority for most MSMEs, yet data challenges limit progress. So again, we asked our participants the following question. We said, are you implementing climate mitigation strategies in your company? And again, most MSMEs were sort of aware of this, right? They said 56% or so said yes, around 35% planning to, and only sort of 9% or so said no. So clearly MSMEs realize that, climate change is an issue. For instance, the MSMEs that we surveyed in the agricultural sector reported, to experiencing reduced crop yields and livestock reduction because of shifting precipitation levels. So what's the problem here? It's that, when these targets are combined with, existing data challenges, these climate adaptation efforts become sort of very difficult to implement clearly. Lots of data collection is necessary. There's sort of overburdening of data needed to fully track progress. So again, MSMEs are already sort of burdened by the amount of limited data. Again, piling this on top sort of reduces, their ability to...
which comes with something.
Oh. Key finding number 3, limited capacity is the biggest barrier to effective data collection. I think, this is sort of fairly intuitive here. We asked our participants, my biggest challenge to data collection along my supply chain is, and again, we can see here on the right, the overwhelming majority said, capacity issues, 65%, roughly 2/3. A few said lack of access to financing, and again, infrastructure issues. When we refer to capacity issues here, we're referring to, skill shortage, training shortages, ability to analyze data. This in itself is fairly intuitive, right? And I think this is even, common amongst even here in England as well. The ability to analyze data is a high barrier. It's, especially amongst running a business. So yeah, this was one of the key findings. And again, under this subheading as well, we asked our participants how confident they were in the accuracies of their data as well. And, this kind of speaks to the fact that even when individuals, or rather MSMEs, are collecting their data, they don't really feel too accurate, or rather accurate about the confidence of their data. This figure was sort of only put an average of around 5 out of 10 here. So what are we saying here? We're saying that, the data quality in itself is not really that good, or rather individuals don't feel confident about the accuracy of their data. So we can reference what we were talking about before, whereby, data accuracy issues often impede this lack of access to finance. So, by data quality, data accuracy, being able to track data over time in an accurate way. So this sort of exacerbates this feedback loop of loan denial, is again referencing our key finding number 1. So this is sort of struck out to me as sort of important and somewhat surprising finding. And again, key finding number 4, AI is recognized as both a key opportunity and challenge for enhancing business data. So we asked our participants, what is the biggest barrier to adopting AI tools for data collection and analysis in your business? And the overwhelming majority here, as we can see on the right, about 79% said knowledge and expertise. So, we can link this to the previous slide as well, what we said about, limiting or lack of capacity being the biggest barrier. That is true for the data side, but also, in adopting new tools, new skills, to be able to exploit AI for, generating revenue for business value. So ultimately, many MSMEs were sort of aware, they were cognizant of the fact that AI can be used for businesses, but they don't necessarily understand how it drives business value. And, this kind of indicates that there's a serious capacity gap here, but this is also backed by many studies as well, right? So, many studies show that limited access to technology, this sort of technical expertise, many differences in, cultural and language differences with respect to AI outputs are all barriers that are impeding, adopting and using AI for business development. So those were the sort of key findings that we found in our scoping paper, in our insights amongst qualitative and quantitative data. I just wanted to quickly run through some recommendations that we sort of came up with ourselves, maybe some low-hanging fruit, you could argue, of ways to move forward, of maybe plugging some of these gaps, and how there could be some sort of scope for partnership or intervention here. So again, just going from the top, we found before that many MSMEs sort of struggle to digitize key data, which again excludes them or rather contributes to the systemic issue of being denied for loans from the bank, etc. So there's many sort of data science techniques or firms that operate to digitize specific data. Again, if this data was digitized, this would be useful to track over time, and again, to allow for more accurate assessment of MSME risk in the data ecosystem. So this is sort of first interesting recommendation to come up with. Secondly, leveraging free and open source data tools. Many statistical software exist out there, such as R, Python, SPSS. These are sort of big data tools, but again, there's a sort of high barrier to knowledge here with respect to understanding on how to utilize them in a business context. So couple that with the relevant capacity training exercises, and again, this could be a useful way forward. Prioritizing essential data, that is, creating a specific sort of hyper streamlined database whereby, MSMEs aren't overburdened with, unnecessary data challenges, climate data, environmental data, business data, etc., in order to, grow their business sustainably. Specifically, having a streamlined database, data management system to prioritize essential data could be a useful way forward. Here, utilizing the mobile technology. Mobiles can be used to develop and conduct surveys and gather data from MSMEs efficiently. There's an interesting article that I just read previously on how digital connectivity can empower MSMEs. There's specific digital platforms that work both online and offline to directly connect smallholder farmers to the agricultural and financial ecosystem. So again, these are sort of maybe low-hanging fruits that may exist. Collaborating with partners, that is, potentially MSMEs fostering knowledge sharing or sharing knowledge of best data practices within a community of practice, etc., etc. And lastly, a rather sort of bigger systemic issue that I talked about before, which is just simply increasing MSME access to finance, right? We saw at the beginning, there's this huge financing gap that sort of doesn't allow MSMEs to grow properly or rather grow sustainably. And it's only going to get bigger, right? So reducing these barriers to digitalization, adoption, and innovation will essentially allow MSMEs to plan for the future, plan for the environmental changes, and to grow sustainably. So to round off, and I know I'm approaching my 20-minute limit here, or maybe I'm over, so I'm going to round off very quickly. But what have we found? We found that the lack of data infrastructure and skills effectively prevents MSMEs from properly participating in the green transition and international markets. As I said at the beginning, climate change is only going to get worse, okay? And Africa will be disproportionately hit by the burdening effects of climate change. So, if we have these rich data systems coupled with the necessary skills to create this sort of system-wide change and allow MSMEs to adapt to the changing environmental and socioeconomic conditions, both locally and geopolitically, this will ultimately allow them to sort of accelerate their ability to develop sustainably. So thank you everyone for listening. I hope you learned a thing or two. If you have any questions, please put them down in the comments. And with that, I will hand over to Hannah, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Great timekeeping. And now we actually want to hear your voice, your opinion. And I will share my screen now, if Adam allows me. And we want to turn to a Mentimeter. And how this works, it's quite easy. We need you to get out your phones or use your computer and go to menti.com and type this code that you'll be seeing on the screen in a bit. Voila. 77677679. It's almost a tongue twister. A lot of numbers continue. You can also easily grab your phone, scan the QR code here, and tell us in your words, in one word, what's your key takeaway from this scoping brief? Anything new, everything same old, tools are out there, then why don't we use them? People have phones, many Zambian businesses have phones. What's on your mind in one word? And you have the opportunity to submit
Hi,
3.
Mm-hmm. We can't see your screen.
Oh, that's a pity. But now you hopefully can. Thank you for that one. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, same story. The answers will probably be flying in soon as you use your phone to scan this QR code that now you'll be able to see. And let me know in one word, what's your takeaway from the scoping brief? Especially also from our panelists, that will be interesting to see.
Maybe you could also just run us through how to access the link again for those that
Sure. There are actually 2 options. You can easily go to menti.com and type the tongue twister code here, or you use the QR code to scan. And I'll submit the answer myself. Adam, there's some great feedback for you. Okay, we see what is coming along here as the takeaways. And what I always wonder, having worked with SMEs also for a while, it seems like a no-brainer. There are tools out there. We have some of our panelists today here that are also thought leaders in the field of data science, and they share a lot of resources. But sometimes it's also just the push to show the importance of what can be lost if we don't track data. We have seen a few of the figures. For me, it's always the almost 30% of refused loan applications from formalized SMEs that sticks in my brain. So even just the call to action today, use your data, track your data. So yeah, wonderful. I will share this beautiful word map that keeps growing. And we go to the next slide with a few more in-depth statements to really explore and get your sentiment here in the room. We have around 50 participants in the room now. That's a great number. What's the problem and what can be done? We have 8 statements here that are, some of them more provocative than others, that will help us to highlight what to prioritize and to understand, in your opinion, what makes sense, what doesn't, where should we go, what's the problem, what can be done. So I'll give you some time here to read through these 8 statements. Same story, you use either your phone or you use it in the with your laptop, and rate on a scale from 1, meaning I strongly disagree, to 5, meaning I strongly agree. Okay, the answer is coming along. And the beauty about this is sometimes the answer lies somewhere in the middle. So we will also see the distribution of your answers here. I'll give you a minute because those are quite heavy statements. And if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat. My colleagues will moderate those questions. Wonderful. I see there's strong agreement with 2 sentences here. Without investment in digital infrastructure, MSMEs in Africa will always lag behind. So calling the need that capacity building cannot come alone. Digitized SME data should be used to integrate international economic planning and policy design. I'm sure this statement makes a few people happy in the room. That's also what we're working on. Also agreement generally with the statement, the Zambian government should have access to digitized MSME data to further its economic agenda. Okay. We have one more slide for you that is a very open one. As we prepare for our panel, we want to give you the chance, we want to hear your voice. What would you like to ask the panel or propose to improve MSME access to and use of data in Zambia? So this is your time to think about questions that you might already have that you would like us to pose to the panel that is coming up, to the panel discussion. We'll leave this open, so you'll be able to submit questions and we will revisit this slide later. So keep the questions coming. I will stop sharing now and go over to our panel discussion. So Adam has done a wonderful job presenting a lot of numbers. What is the magic number of today? For me, it's clearly 3, or 3 like the Germans do it. If anyone of you has seen the movie Inglourious Basterds, you know it can make a difference. But either way, 3 is the magic number because $3.6 billion is the financing gap for Zambian SMEs. 30% is the share of SMEs in the formal sector, those that are already registered, still denied loans due to missing financial records. And 3% Africa's total contribution to global carbon dioxide emissions since Industrial Revolution, yet Africa is suffering disproportionately from the effects of climate change. So 3 is the number of climate injustice. That's the challenge, and we believe that data can be part of the solution. We have entrepreneurs on board, data scientists, representatives of the finance sector, ecosystem enablers, and the policy and regulatory side. What a rich panel to discuss the question, is data the missing link for Zambian entrepreneurs and the ecosystem? So now I will go through your bios one by one, and I will ask you to give me one hashtag that describes your work best. Don't worry, I will start to make it easier. Heading a Geneva-based foundation where I attend platforms and events in and around Switzerland, like the World Economic Forum this year in Davos, where you hear conversations at the AI House on billions being spent on training data for AI models, and then realizing at the same time how hard it is to raise funds to close those most pressing data gaps in places where funding would be most needed. My hashtag is data is power. Let's start with Hilary. Hilary Sang is the founder of Fanaka, a fintech platform supporting African MSMEs with accessible credit, micro-insurance, and financial literacy. Hilary, you have over 10 years of experience in insurtech, health tech, agri-tech, energy, and you're also a writer. So I'm expecting a great word from you. What's your hashtag to describe your work?
Thank you for that. I think my hashtag will be building from scratch.
Building from scratch. Thank you for that. Let's turn to Pendo Manjele next. Pendo's LinkedIn tagline is leveraging data to unlock potential in financial services. Pendo is a data and analytics senior specialist in the strategy and data unit at one of Zambia's biggest banks, Zanaco, where she has spent nearly 3 years in using data science and machine learning to power strategic decisions and digital transformation in banking. Pendo, I'm one of the lucky 5,000 followers of yours on LinkedIn. I'm a fan. What's your hashtag?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. Well, I would say data is power. I hope that hasn't been taken.
Sorry about that, but we can share the same one. I'm honored.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Then next we go to Mapalo Lukashi, who I can call a colleague now and say, working with Mapalo, you really realize he's an enabler. He's also the data and AI lead at BongoHive. And with a strong background in data analysis and business strategy, Mapalo focuses on leveraging data-driven insights to foster innovation and support business growth. And he has also just recently launched the first AI lab in Zambia. Mapalo, what's your hashtag?
Well, thank you so much there, Hannah. My hashtag will be foundational for heights to be attained.
Wow, that's a strong one. Last but not least, we have Stephen Jackson with us. Stephen is the lead economist at the Zambia Evidence Lab, a government-led initiative under the Ministry of Finance and National Planning, with support from the International Growth Centre, which is an economic research centre based at the London School of Economics, operated in partnership with Oxford University. His work focuses on leveraging data to generate actionable policy insights for government. He also is a PhD candidate at Sorbonne University in Paris, researching the economic and environmental impacts of small-scale mining in Liberia and access to clean water in the DRC. Stephen, to make you more human, I will also share your LinkedIn background picture as an elephant. You are truly passionate about Africa. I can see that. What's your hashtag?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the great introduction, Hannah, and thanks for the invite. I'm going to go with hashtag evidence-based policy. I know it's cliche, but that's my choice.
Cliche, but true. That's what we need. And we want this whole Data Boost project to be solution-driven. For every good solution, we first need to really take apart the problem and understand it. Hilary, as an entrepreneur and a data guru, you are the problem and solution at the same time. Mavuto maningi iwe. So as an entrepreneur, what have been some of the biggest challenges you've encountered in using data to drive business growth, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, I think I take a lot from the insights that I've shared or have been shared here. One of the biggest challenge that you will have when working with SMEs, which is the industry working, is some of them they don't even separate themselves from the business. So they run this small business as just as thing they do. That separation is not there. Self-reported data is always wrong. So you have to know the right questions to ask, because you won't ask a small business, for example, what revenues do you generate a month? They don't even know what revenues are. You have to break it down per day. How much do you buy? How much did you sell? Which also brings in the capacity issue. They can't do it by themselves, self-reported data, so you have to bring in people, which increases the cost. So, but that is what we have been able to do, working with field entrepreneurs in the ground, working with these SMEs, being able to collect data. And over time, we have seen that improve. And now is when we are now going into building capacity on this other end, to be able to look at that data, to be able to run correlation between the incoming data and the results of the payment. How do the payments look like? So what I will say will be the most accurate data will be the repayment behavior, because we track that based on how they pay. And then we now go backwards to rework on what we collect. Thank you.
Thank you for that. You've actually already shared very valuable insights on how solutions like yours can help to collect data as a byproduct. And we will dig deeper into how Fanaka works later. Now from the fintech to supposedly traditional financial institutions. Pendo, from a financial institution's perspective, what are some of the key data gaps you have observed that are inhibiting SMEs from accessing finance? And how can these data gaps be addressed to improve access to finance for MSMEs?
Thank you, Hilary. Thank you, Hannah. And I think just riding on Hilary, the challenges are similar. And to perhaps maybe just give a more detailed background on the existence of financial institutions, which exist basically to facilitate the economic activity by, of course, enabling payments, promoting financial and economic resilience, financial inclusion as well, and also channeling capital from borrowers to savers. But at the same time, managing risk is a very critical component. So in the process of financing or credit or giving loans, data is a very, very key component. And financial services leverage data to base off those decisions. It's the fair way to determine who gets a loan or who gets credit and who doesn't get credit, right? On the other hand, most SMEs, I think from the studies that you had shown, 5 out of 10 do not have formal data, formal financial records, which make it a gamble of who's going to get a loan and who's not going to get a loan. So automatically, if there's no information about, there are no financial records, automatically you are disadvantaged, because the gamble will be made on, should we give the loan to this? It's a yes or no question here. So if you do not have financial records, it's a fail-safe is no credit for this SME. So data is important. Having the formal information, data management, record keeping is very key, and also credit history. For most SMEs, especially newer ones, the credit history is not documented maybe by the bureaus, CRBs, or any bank or financial institution. And thereby it also makes it a bit challenging to determine whether that SME will have the capacity to repay. So there are a number of data points that are required, especially for SMEs, to determine whether they do qualify or not, both financial and non-financial. Financial records, which are very key. However, even non-financial records such as tax compliance, registration compliance. So it's very important to have all the business records and documents in order, and also your compliance records. However, mitigating this also starts with having that information in place, your financial records, documentation, very important. There are free technologies and tools that could help with managing data and also payment records. Cash is king, but it also does inhibit and determine where your cash is going and how your cash is flowing. So I think it's very important that you leverage technology and also have a proper record keeping and management and audit as well, financial records, to make it more seamless for financial institutions, especially traditional ones, to be able to lend to SMEs.
Thank you very much. A very rich statement. And yes, being a very cash-prone society, that of course also inhibits the collection of tracking financial flows. And already I hear a few concrete proposals here. Closing credit history data gaps. Isn't that an actionable proposal coming up? And now from the financial access side to the other side of de-risking entrepreneurs, we need enablers. And I think BongoHive is really doing a brilliant job in Zambia in that field. Mapalo, to you, as an ecosystem builder, what role do you think data plays in the growth and sustainability of startups in Zambia?
Well, thank you, Hannah, and thank you all. So one of the things that we as BongoHive are really interested in is trying to see that some growth and startup take place and sustainability take place with startups. So data definitely plays a role as a foundational component. And by what I mean by that is that there are critical elements that go into the starting process of a startup, like how they identify evidence-based decisions rather than intuition, right at the beginning of that idea process. And that's why it's a very critical component right at the start, because we have a market that's mostly fragmented, right? And we have people being used to intuition, a gut feeling. And as ecosystem support organizations, our focus is being able to introduce data right at the start by helping startups make evidence-based decisions. And one thing that we can see with the trend of data growing and maturing into AI models and all this new technology, people are no longer just depending on frameworks that were established. And we've also begun to see how we're helping startups move beyond just looking at things at a framework level, for example, a lean canvas model, to being able to utilize technology that's hinged on data to make those evidence-based decisions. And beyond startup, data still plays a role when it comes to the market validation, understanding consumer behavior, right? So for mid-level companies that are trying to go towards becoming larger enterprises, they need to be using data to make decisions on how they should go forward, whether they need to pivot based off trends. And that's why we see the need for data to be carried on from that foundation through different generational moments. It could be from how the product is changing over time, pricing strategies. We get a lot of people just say, oh, my friend is selling it at 10 kwacha, I should also sell it at 10. But not understanding whether that's harming the economy or benefiting the client at the end of the day. So data must be critical throughout the stages of a startup's growth and as they envision sustainability. And we are here as ecosystem support organizations, ecosystem builders, to really help through that process at each stage of that process. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mapalo. I'm wondering now, is the gut the inhibitor for data use? And you've shared something very important, since AI tools are more intuitive as traditional data analysis tools where you need to learn much more before you get to your results. Maybe this is really closer to the gut. Let's turn to another enabler. As part of enablers, we usually also count the public sector. Stephen, as part of the research for the scoping brief that Adam just presented, we have read your policy paper on administrative data in Zambia. It is titled Unlocking the Potential of Zambia's Administrative Data. And the results are taken from interviews with over a dozen government ministries and a review of global best practices. It provides evidence on what actually constrains the use of administrative data in the Zambian government presently, and also gives pathways for overcoming these constraints. Tell us a bit about the Zambia Evidence Lab And the work similar to this great research paper, and also from that experience, the question to you would be, how can the government and regulatory bodies use data to create policies that better support the Zambian growth and development of SMEs?
Thanks. That's a really great question, and I'm happy to see that people have read the report outside of the team. And this question is exactly the mandate of the Evidence Lab. So I think this is perfect introspection for us as well to discuss this. And I'll try to be relatively brief because I also would really love to hear from the audience what you feel like what the government should be doing more of. And we can try and act as an intermediary, a bit of advocacy to try and push that on our end. And actually, when we were setting up the lab, there was a directive that came from very high up in the government, from His Excellency the President and the Honourable Minister of Finance, Mr. Musokotwane, that was to help SMEs grow, formalize, scale up. And so that's just to give you an idea that this is something that's happening at a very high level. Whether that's trickling down into policy is another question. We're trying our best to ensure that it is, but it is definitely a national priority. I just wanted to say that to begin with. And so in terms of the policy life cycle, we usually think of this in 3 stages. We think of it as formulation. This is where data can inform good policy before it's even implemented. Data can also be used to monitor policy implementation, of course, and see whether it's having the intended effects. And you can also use it for final evaluation. So it's really valuable across the entire life cycle of a specific policy. And this question in particular, I think, speaks to the formulation stage, which is interesting and is a lot of where we're trying to get inroads with the Zambian government. And I think the short answer to the question is that government stakeholders and policymakers need more access to data on SMEs. If I had to just give you a 1-sentence answer to that question, and they would love more information on SMEs. So I think the Bank of Zambia survey that you've used for your report, I think that's quite unique and is being used quite a lot. But we could be doing so much more on the public sector side of things to collect more data on SMEs. To better understand the landscape and what we could do. I think that's a nice way of looking at it, because a lot of this webinar is about how SMEs can use data for their business, but just bear in mind that on the flip side, the government would also love more data on you as SME entrepreneurs or workers, and that's what we're striving to do. So yeah, like I said, it would be great to understand more about the size, the location, what sector SMEs are active in, what markets they're targeting. And like I said, that Bank of Zambia survey is really valuable in that sense, because other data sources like the World Bank Enterprise Survey are slightly too biased towards the formal sector, I would say. And I was really interested in the report to find out that almost half of these SMEs in Zambia are in retail and wholesale. And so really small, right, businesses and selling small goods and services. So that makes it very different already. That gives a very different approach to the government when you think that you're targeting the services sector in urban areas, in particular, Lusaka, the Copper Belt, as opposed to very small scale agriculture, for instance. So I think that's a really valuable take. And I would just end by saying there's a lot of challenges, but the main challenge for now for the ministry, in particular, the ministry that's concerned by this webinar, the Ministry of Small and Medium Enterprise Development, is also pulling data from other ministries. So this is something that happens a lot in Zambia, where the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry will hold some data, and ZRA will have data, NAPSA will have data, PACRA will have data. You could go on and on with this list. And it's very difficult for each institution to access another institution's data. So I would say that's the main thing that we're working on, to try and break down these data silos and barriers, and where we can really help this new ministry, the Ministry of Small and Medium Enterprise Development, that I think is a very good idea to have and that can really be empowered and capacitated much more. So I'll stop there. I'm sorry I went on for a bit long.
It was great that you kept on going on, because I learned that it seems like we need to build more bridges. First of all, that bridge, that continuous feedback flow between the SME information and government. So yes, it's not only SMEs collecting more data, analyzing the data better, but also feeding this information that sometimes is collected as a byproduct back to the circle and making sure it is used and ends up in policy formulation. But also you mentioned data siloing here, also building the bridges between different government institutions, a low-hanging fruit, PACRA and the Ministry for SME Development would be one that is very intuitive. And maybe also using the data that some of the fintechs are already collecting, that could be a valuable proposal to close a few data gaps. So I'm turning to Hillary now. I checked Fanaka online. And maybe you can first of all also give us a summary on what Fanaka's journey was and where you are currently, what's in the pipeline. You use a so-called data-driven loan assessment. How does that work, and what variables do you look at? How do you interpret them?
Yeah, so when I came into Zambia, basically I was working for Apollo Agriculture, which is another agri-tech that gives loans to smallholder farmers. So I came in to open their first international branch in Zambia. And the first thing that we were using in Kenya, which was quite clear, was the CRB data that we could pass any farmer because of the multiple digital lenders platforms that exist in Kenya. Those farmers are already in those databases, and we could actually check and credit score them as an initial check before we could do anything else. But when it came into Zambia, there was a big difference, because that wasn't there. TransUnion was here, but we could run multiple number of farmers there. They were not there. So basically that will be abandoned. So you have to look for other ways. So after doing a bit of work with them, now I left to start setting up Fanaka. One of the things that I knew immediately that I need data, because I'd sat in those data meetings, I'd worked with data science teams to build the credit models that we were powering up at Apollo. And I knew that we will need as the first step. So we started collecting data. So we were more operational data than using that data to actually make decisions. But they could actually start telling us some stories. So we collected about 70 data points at the time that we meet a small business. This would be a marketeer, somebody running a very small business, chicken sellers. So 67% are agricultural based and 85% are women. But these are basically women running small businesses in the markets. And we have a field team that works with them to collect these data points. Now we process this data. We try to understand things like a smaller question. Like, one of the things that people will assume is that the woman who did up to grade 7 will not understand the financials. But that is a very big assumption. It's just that the right questions are asked. If you ask them, for example, how much did you buy this? How much will you sell? How much will you make? What were your costs? And you break down those questions like that, they can give you those breakdowns. And then we could collect that and kind of know how much they make in a certain period of time. Based on that, we could give them credit based on that and kind of build their credit over time and schedule it based on the cash flow. So that is what we have been doing. But now that we have a bit of resources, we are doing a project in data science. So we are looking at all the data points. I think right now we have about 250,000 data points, both that came from loan origination all the way to how they repaid. And we are putting that together to create our own small CRB and start building that up. What we will be doing, we'll be building that on our backend side. So data coming out of the field will hit it fast, and it will kind of tell us a little bit of a story, not as much as we want to know now, but that story will keep improving while the model will keep learning. So we are now building the model. We are refactoring our complete database with a bit of funding that we got to be able to do that. So we will kind of be the first people to do a complete from scratch. That is why I said building from scratch, build sort of a credit model for SMEs in Zambia. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Hilary. I'll definitely come back to you and make some time to dig deeper into everything you've just shared. And you mentioned something very important also here, that operational data is very often collected, but for what purpose? It's there lying around, but it's about turning this data into information, into data stories. And I think that could be something very engaging, especially that speaks also to the local mindset. Storytelling is a big thing traditionally. So I think data storytelling and maybe connecting fintechs to close data gaps through anonymized customer track record and turn this into data stories could be another proposal that we have in the room. We have one more question before we open up to the public who already has submitted a lot of questions. You are now able to go back to the Menti and vote for the different questions that have been submitted, so we can look at the top 3 and make sure your voices are heard. So please go to the Menti and vote. And I will go now, having Pendo here, I'll go back to Pendo. And I have a question going more towards also the digital transformation. How do you see the digital transformation and the adaptation of digital tools? We have just heard Fanaka, fintech apps. This is one of the digital tools available for SMEs. How do you see that affecting SMEs' access to finance? How is also Zanaco reacting to that, and other specific technologies that you believe can bridge the data gap for these entrepreneurs?
That's a very good question. And I think especially now, it's a very important question to ask because it can go both ways, right? We have the nature of data transformation. We're now in an AI era, and AI generally is data hungry. So we have credit scoring models which are non-traditional and are looking at different data points beyond the financial record. And if for a model, a particular business or really big disadvantage in my earlier question. And so what's very important is, where are we going next? I think for SMEs to ask if they need access to finance is, what does the next level of financing look like from both the financial services provider, neobanks as well, and how are we positioned for us to have that access to finance? And technology is what's bridging the gap, data, AI. So you have to have sufficient information for those AI technologies to understand or learn and tell your story, as Hilary said. Without sufficient information, you'll be telling a half story about what your business does, your business financial capability to pay back or repay, and also grow at the same time. And in that case, you remain disadvantaged because at the end of the day, you want to demonstrate the capacity to repay and that you're not a high risk in terms of an SME, because at the end of the day, it's information about the SME and not the individual. And I think sometimes SMEs do go with the front foot as an individual as opposed to the business. So does the business have sufficient information that can be validated, not from a human perspective, but from a machine perspective that can be understood and translated and gives you a strong position of being credit worthy? So it's important to have that information and record keeping. I think then, like I mentioned, there are a number of databases that information can be kept, and also that lineage. So digital transformation would definitely increase accessibility, as the decision points will not be based on the traditional financial credit scoring, but there'll be a number of behavioral data points that will be taken into account. And this is all based on having structured data about the business and all the records in place. And on the other hand, it can go the other way around, in that we also are looking at, I think for SMEs now, it's become more easier to also build your own systems with AI. You can have your own financial record bookkeeping. You build it on your own without needing high-tech capacity to create those solutions for you. I think so it's very important that data is taken into account, we have evolved into a very critical and important technology, which is being used to make decisions. So I think it's very important that data is made available. Without data, it becomes it's very challenging to make decisions, both from a human perspective, but for machines, it's even harder.
Thank you very much for that. You also said AI is data hungry, and what you've shared on the credit scoring is very important. The behavioral data points, and also what we do through those digital tools, we actually find ways to also collect citizen-generated data that could help us to close data gaps effectively. I will now turn to our mentee for the last questions, and voting is ongoing. So let me end the voting now and see what are the top questions that we have for you. Number one, I don't know who wants to take this one up, the most popular one. How can the lending institutions be brought in to innovate for financial inclusion of MSMEs? The MSMEs cannot surely be the burden to be included into formalized financial systems. Would anyone like to take up this question? Somehow looking towards Hillary.
Yeah, can you just repeat the question again?
Sure. I mean, we have said similar points already. How can the lending institutions be brought in to innovate for financial inclusion of MSMEs? So this is clearly around innovation for financial inclusion. So I guess fintech would be one solution.
Yeah, I think fintech is one solution. De-risking it, telling people that the capacity to pay is there and the willingness to pay is there among these MSMEs. If you want them to do it by themselves, they will not. But if you meet them where they are, I think they will be able to provide you with the information that you need. And that is what we have been doing. And we have been collecting all these data points and putting it together and making sense of it and be able to start lending to them. But we will get to a place where we will let them do it by themselves. But now, at least we use a hybrid model. But I think that when we can be able to tell their story and tell that they have the capacity and the willingness, which are the two most important variables when it comes to lending, and we show that, I think even the more formal institutions like banks will start rather slowly coming this direction.
Perfect. Thank you for taking up that question. We have a question to Stephen directly. The question is, Stephen, are there incentives for MSMEs that integrate data-driven approaches into their operations?
I'm not entirely sure if there are incentives, at least coming from government. I'm sure there are kind of inherent incentives and efficiency gains to be made, or at least I would hope so. If you can integrate data and kind of move towards more advanced business analytics. So I suppose that would be the main incentive. I can't speak to any incentives that have been thought of from a kind of policy side, right? Or in terms of, I don't know, different tax regimes or subsidies for this kind of business development approach. So I'm sorry, I know that's not quite a satisfactory response, but I would like to think that the incentive is there, but it's more of an incentive that is inherent to adopting these practices.
That could be an interesting pathway to think. I know that there are some first thoughts of rewarding citizen scientists for collecting data, for closing data gaps, now that there's a market for data, especially in the data-hungry AI age. So that could be something we actually start thinking towards. I will hand over the last question to Mapalo before I also hand back over to our MC today. Mapalo, for you the question, how do we make it easier for MSMEs to track data?
Well, that's a very nice question. When you talk about making it easier for SMEs to track data, it brings me to the thought of awareness, right? It starts from there, right? SMEs should be first aware of where they are, and that's why as ESOs, one of the things we focus on is trying to incubate a startup, and the process is preparing the startup for what's at the end. You know, when you incubate a child, you're preparing them to be more accustomed to the world, right? When you incubate a startup, you're trying to help them be more accustomed to what the world needs from them. So how do we then incentivize the startups to be ready to be able to track the right data is by allowing them to go through processes of assessments, being able to understand what's suitable for them based on their industry, their sector, their positioning. And when they can understand that from that awareness perspective, we then can show them or say match them to the particular data they should be interested in. Not every person will be tracking data at a biological level, right? It might have to be in the healthcare industry for that. You know, not everyone will be tracking data at a level of maybe say geographic data. Not everyone needs that spatial data. So it really starts from awareness. And once awareness has been achieved, and that's why we do encourage startups to really participate in this literacy opportunities, the opportunities to become aware of what's needed. AI is something huge. Data is something very important. We can't talk to you about AI before we talk to you about data. The truth of the matter is that if the foundation is not right, we can't proceed to the next level. But that's where it starts from. And my parting words would be that startups should be very curious. Like just develop a hunger for curiosity. Because if you're not hungry as a startup, you only know what people want you to know. But if you become hungry to look for that data, to look for that information, to attend programs, to get incubated, it then allows you to begin to have all the ingredients you need for that desired end, right? So it starts from that point, awareness, and then from there we are off to the races, like one would say. Thank you.
Wonderful. Curiosity is the key. That's beautiful. And for those that are curious to read the full scoping brief, you'll be able to download it from our LinkedIn. So you have the full version available. And yeah, thank you for this really brilliant panel. I'm positively surprised by the rich answers we've received. And I could continue with this great group for hours. And I'm sure we would have actionable proposals to hand over to funders ready. And we will get there. For now, I'm handing back over to our host, back to Molemwa. Thank you so much to the panelists.
Right. Thank you so much, Hannah, for doing such a good job with facilitating the panel discussion. And to our panelists, thank you so much for sharing your insights regarding our topic of discussion. We truly appreciate you taking the time to join us here and also share your thoughts. Before we conclude, we have a couple of questions that our audience have raised in the chat, as well as the Q&A section that we will also address, just to ensure that all your burning questions are addressed by both Data for Change, the panelists, as well as BongoHive. So just head over to the chat. There's a question from Chanda that's directed to Pendo. So Chanda is asking, Pendo, what would you say is the temperature with traditional financial institutions around credit scoring as a service?
Interesting question. And I think credit scoring is very wide in that there's the traditional credit scoring and there's also the credit scoring beyond financial beyond only financial data. So credit scoring, I think, is being done internally for most financial institutions, must say, and of course using financial data points. Of course, this is becoming more robust. So in terms of credit scoring as a service, this would be very subjective and depending on the financial institutions and the internal capabilities. So where they do not have the internal capabilities to do their own credit scoring, of course, it's imperative to outsource But in terms of what the temperature is, I think is dependent on the kind of credit scoring that service provider would be offering. So I think in a nutshell, I think it's quite a wide array that I cannot have a single answer for.
Right. Thank you for answering that. While you're still on the mic, there's another question that's directed towards financial institutions. So Charles is asking how financial institutions, including Zanaco and others, intend to cooperate with the newly created MSME ministry to disseminate information to businesses and both informal and formal, and how to present business plans, including how to access tools for improved bookkeeping systems. So he's asking around financial institutions and collaboration with the newly formed ministry.
On that collaboration, maybe I'll be preempting, but from financial institutions, there's always information available on how, not necessarily on how a financial institution should operate in terms of bookkeeping, etc. But in terms of how can you access finance, what do you need to put in place from a consultative perspective, of course, as a client, that information is available as you walk into the institution. And maybe for the general public, yes, we also do host webinars and similar, but more on the financial tailored to just give more insight on the services that are offered, the financial services that are offered to MSMEs. Yes, and we also do have tailored services for SMEs as well. So that information is available, but more from how the institution can give you a service. But in terms of how you as an SME should operate, I think that's more, the onus is mostly on the SME, so that what data is required is there. So perhaps it's also important to just consult on how, and this information is made available to you as an SME. So, but from the collaborative perspective, I would preempt with the ministry.
Great. Thank you so much, Pendo. I can see some of the questions that were asked have already been addressed by the team. Adam, there's one directed towards you. So I think this is Moa. He's asking what sort of information falls under data. And then he says, ledgers and accounts are controlled by SMEs themselves. Wouldn't the limited trust in data be for data outside of their control?
Yes, I think this question was sort of touched upon within over the last discussion, in that, yes, ultimately it is outside the control, but having data in digital format allows individuals to create those data pipelines and to track data over time. I think maybe having more digitized data is seen as more valuable as opposed to be taken on ledgers. Potentially that's just a as a cultural thing. Potentially it's been seen maybe due to the financial system, but yeah, I think in essence, I think mainly if I was working in the insurance market, I'd prefer to see digitized data, which is easily to manipulate and to track risk and accurately assess risk and collateral over time. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
All right, thank you. We have 2 minutes to go before we close the Q&A segment. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Or if you'd like to unmute your mic, feel free to raise your hand and we'll be able to give you the platform to ask any questions that you might have. Going once. Okay, I can see somebody's hand is raised. Please go ahead, Stefan.
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to say before wrapping up that I think there are two really exciting things for MSMEs in Zambia that we could be doing more to use. The first one is mobile money data. There's a huge proportion of these MSMEs that are small retail businesses, right? People selling stuff in really small semi-formal shops or on the street. And if you can access that mobile money data, I know that's tricky. We've spoken to the Bank of Zambia to work on this, but you can build almost an entire transaction history. I know you're missing all the cash payments, but you can really build a really detailed history of sales that these people have made. And their purchases. Okay, so I know that's not exactly a credit score, but that's already, approximating something that's starting to at least build some credibility for these businesses, that they've been in operation for a certain amount of time and that they are, dealing with a certain volume of transactions daily, weekly, or at whatever frequency. And the second thing is we've been working with ZRA on smart invoicing, and this is also applicable to the retail sector, right? So and it's easy to think of we could also do more to reciprocate on the ZRA side and say you're playing the game and playing along with us by doing smart invoicing and digitizing your VAT procedures. And obviously ZRA benefits from that. So ZRA can also, and I'm not speaking on their behalf, but they can also do more to make available a history of your tax filings and things like that, and have a platform in place where small businesses can access, their history of invoices and things like that. And so smart invoicing is just the start, but you could expand that far beyond that. So I just wanted to touch on those two things before letting everyone go for the evening.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That's a very, very, very valuable and insightful point that you've raised there regarding mobile money. And I'm grateful for everybody once again for just being part of this, for ensuring your insights from your different sectors and different fields, because it makes the conversation more comprehensive if we get to hear from different perspectives. So really grateful for all of you being present. I'm pretty sure we have in our audience people wondering what happens next after this webinar, after all the insights have been shared. What actionable next steps are we taking as Data for Change and BongoHive? So I will hand over to my colleague Mapalo, who will share some of the next steps that we have in mind for our SMEs, even as we work towards ensuring that they're using data. Over to you, Mapalo.
Well, thanks, Molemwa, and thanks to all the panelists. This has been an electric session. I feel that there's been a lot that has been covered here, and the question that should be on our minds is what next from here, right? If you've been here seated, you've participated in the Mentimeter, you heard all the insights that Adam provided, you must be asking yourself, what next? Because this platform allows us to be able to know what we should be thinking about and what we should be taking seriously. Just look at what Stephen just said at the end there. There's a great source, potential source in mobile data, right? Mobile money data. And those are the type of insights that could potentially spark an idea that could start a business that could literally solve and fill that gap, right? And I would really love to see a lot of people on the call coming to BongoHive sites and be able to look at what we're doing there and potentially join this. And just going back to stuff that Hannah said, Hannah mentioned a lot of stuff. One of our things was her hashtag around power. And we need to think around how this is power being given to us. This information that we've received today, and by the way, the scoping brief you'll be receiving today is an extra advantage that adds to your power, because then you can already begin to think about areas where there is interest, areas where there are gaps, and those are the things that we should begin to build on, right? The hard work has been done. A lot has been put together to bring this value, and we should ask ourselves, how do we build from here? A lot has been talked about how financial access is also an area that data can play a role. Talk about credit scores. Pendo had a lot of great points there on how we could be thinking around financial data, financial inclusion, and how we can be part of this process, from the policy end of things to the development side of things to the support side of things. We literally have had a full meal here. If I could say a balanced diet was on the menu, we definitely had one. And the question is, what is our portion from this? And in conclusion, one of the things that I'm excited about also about today, as we are unveiling the scoping brief that will be sent to all people that registered for this particular session, and later on it's going to be provided on our website links, and that will be shared on our social media platforms, right? One of the interesting things is that Data for Change and BongoHive are partnered together to bring such value right here to our fingertips where we can discuss this value. And we are open to partnerships with people like Zambia Evidence Lab and different other people who are interested in being able to share in this work that we can build together and ensure that Zambia is benefiting from data in many ways that benefit startups, benefit micro, medium enterprises as well. Other things that we could also note as we're coming to a close is that as BongoHive, we recently launched our AI lab. So if you go to ai.bongohive.co.zm, I'll say that again, ai.bongohive.co.zm, you will find value there. We've got AI tools that help you start understanding awareness, right, on where you are. We've got an assessment tool there to help you understand your AI readiness. And we've got other tools that actually help you build a strategy to automate your business. So if you feel you're at that particular stage, there are tools for you there. And also you get to know sectors we're interested in, the support we are providing, our soon to launch AI fellowship, and many great resources. Also important to note is that Data for Change will be on the ground. I'm excited about this. So they'll be on the ground and they're going to be doing some trainings, some master classes. They'll be open to meetings, partnerships, discussions. They're going to be on the ground for 6 months, starting this month. So make sure that you get in touch with Data for Change and see the opportunities that they will have. We talked about literacy. Well, they're coming. There'll be trainings. There'll be master classes being done. And to conclude all this, I want to just appreciate every person who attended this session. Without you, would have been speaking to empty, I would have loved to say empty seats, but virtual worlds have changed that. But probably empty spaces in the Zoom, in the Zoom list. But also to exceptionally appreciate all panelists, including myself, for being part of this process and just being able to have conversations. Hopefully we've picked something. Hopefully you've taken your notes. And from me, the Data for Change team, BongoHive team, we just want to ask you to say, be ready for the scoping brief, read it, provide us with any feedback that you may have. We are going to be open to answering questions even after this. Reach out to us through our communication channels, on our social medias, on our website. And thank you once more. And I'm going to bring this to a close. And before we go, just be able to ensure that you just drop in the chat again one thing that you will definitely do after this, whether it's research, whether you're going to go and find a network, you're going to reach out to Data for Change, you're going to use BongoHive, just put in your chat your number one thing you're going to do from here. I make it a point after every impactful session to take a note about what I should do. That way I make sure that at least there's something that I gain from that meeting. So go ahead and just drop it in the comment section and say what you're going to do. I'm about to drop mine. After this, what I am going to do. So just do that and we can all be on our merry way and have our lovely day left. So go ahead and do that. Well, for me, it's simple. I'm going to read the scoping brief again because I just want to know it entirely. Like I've been reading this for a long time and I want to read it again. So that's for me. I want to read it until I internalize it so that I can spot gaps and opportunities all over. We've got some interesting things. Listen and work and celebrate. Amazing. Oh, amazing. Thank you all for posting that and wishing you all a lovely rest of the day. And thank you for being part of this.
Maybe we could also take a screen grab.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have a call for a screen grab. So if you want to ensure that you look great, just please turn on your camera and Mulema is going to assist us with that. This is one for the box. So at the count of 3, and Mulema will take a screenshot. 1, 2, 3.
Great. Brilliant
Awesome.
smile.
Got it. All right. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.